It is very important to know how to select objects in a design and also know what different tools are available to you for selecting objects. So in this video, I hope to show you some different methods that I use when I select objects in a design using the Floriani software. Probably the most basic, common way of selecting an item in the software is using the select tool. And with the select tool, you'll notice it's up here in the top left. At the same time, it's also in the floating toolbar. If you don't see it in the floating toolbar, that means that you've chose a different way of selecting. Like for instance, you're in the shape tool. It's dynamic, so it changes. But typically, if you click off of something, if nothing is selected at the time, it'll be there. So I use this quite often, or I just go and select the selection tool. Now you'll notice that as I hover over this selection tool, it does tell me that I can choose to use Control plus the number 1 on the keyboard as a keyboard shortcut. So I can just hit Control 1 and it will select it. So watch how this works. Let me go ahead and select something and click off of it. I'll choose a different tool, and if I hit Control plus 1, it's going to go into the select tool. It's going to select it. So just wanted to point that out, that there is a keyboard shortcut for it. So that's the most common selection tool, and with this tool you can simply click on a stitch object and it will select it, or even vector artwork. And you can also click and drag over an area to select something. That's how you could select multiple pieces at the same time. Like if I start down here, if I click and drag, it's going to select everything that my cursor went around. Now I do want to point out right here, it selected this piece and I might not have wanted to. So there is a way to kind of select exactly what you want, especially when you're working in an area where there's a lot of different things going on, and if you click and drag over, you're going to end up also selecting something else. And that's by using the second option, which is this lasso select tool. I really like this tool. It's not something to use a lot, but it comes in very handy when you need to select something like down here where you just want to get this part of the green. You will want to utilize the lasso select. So let me show you how that works. I'm just left mouse clicking and I'm drawing a box around the objects that I want to select. And how this works is it has to entirely go around an object to select it. So even if I go a little bit into this red satin stitch right here, it's not going to select it because I didn't go all the way around it, if that makes sense. So I come back here and then I right mouse click and you can see that it selected that, and I no longer have this piece selected. So just to show you again how this works, if I come up here to the lasso select, if I don't go all the way around an object and I only partially get around it, it's not going to select everything. So if I right click, notice that nothing was selected. You have to go entirely around a shape in order for it to work. So even when I do this, I think I'm getting everything, but I'm not getting down here on this piece. So that's how the lasso select tool works. You have to go entirely around something, and you don't have to trace it perfectly by any means. It's just going to select whatever you go around. And so even in this area right here, if I really wanted to get this blue only, I can just kind of come in, go around it, right click, and I missed a little area right there, so it didn't grab everything. So that's something that you have to make sure that when you're using this tool, you get around everything. And if you don't, see, this is going to select part of the green because I didn't go around it, but if you don't get all the way around it, it wouldn't select it. So all I would have to do Just come back up and over to ignore that part. I love the lasso select tool. It's a great tool. It's something you definitely want to learn how to utilize. So those are the basic ways of selecting something. There is the shape tool, and there's also the stitch tool, and those really have to do with selection as well. So if I come in here and I select it using the select tool, now I can go into the shape edit tool, and this is where it will turn into edit mode for whatever you have selected. So you'll notice that the floating toolbar changed because there's now different things that I can do to this selected piece, and we're not going into those in this video. There'll be another video that will talk about editing, and it will discuss this floating toolbar. But just notice that it selects it and it gives me the points or the nodes, and that I can click and drag to reshape the object. So that is a different select mode. And the last one I'm going to zoom in for. I'm going to zoom into this area right here, and this is going to be this stitch tool. Now this stitch tool is not something that is utilized very often, and the reason is because it really goes in and edits each point of a stitch. So like for example, it wouldn't be necessary, I'm zoomed in, but if I needed to adjust this area and I couldn't quite do it with the shape tool, and I just really want to move where this line is, I can come in and you can see that as I get close to what would be, if I turn on my stitch points, that'll help, it selects that stitch point. Okay, now I can come in and click and drag it and move it just like this, and I can really get in and modify the look and shape of the stitches. Now the thing that you have to keep in mind whenever using this tool is that we are still utilizing a WAF file. So these are kind of virtual stitches at this point, and if I make a change to this area of this red satin, like for instance I come in here, I do all this work to make it have a look I want, but then I realize that I need to change the density of this stitch, it's going to remove these. And the reason that is because the software regenerates stitches as we modify them when we're in the digitizing mode. So just to show you, if I hit the selection tool and I come in and I select this stitch, if I wanted to make this a 0.4 density, just watch what happens here. If I go to 0.4 and hit apply, everything goes back, and that's because it had to regenerate the stitches. So that's just something that I wanted to point out, because you can spend a lot of time really trying to tweak stitches, but if you need to regenerate it all by changing any setting whatsoever on the piece that you just click and drag out points, you're going to lose all that work. And the reason that I want to point out is because I've done it. I've done it a couple times, and so it's something that you just have to keep in mind. It's the last thing you'd want to do. You would want to make sure that everything else in your design is exactly how you want it before you kind of use that tool to drag some stitches out. Another thing to keep in mind with it is when you select something, you right click, you can do preserve as stitches, and you have to be careful with this, but preserve with stitches makes it to where it's no longer a virtual stitch, it becomes actual stitch data. And what that means is you're not going to be able to edit it anymore, not in a normal way like density and stuff. So if I come here and I do preserve stitches, you'll see that I lose all that ability. Let me go ahead and undo. But the reason that I'm pointing this out is because if you do any adjusting with this stitch tool, you will definitely want to consider preserving it as stitches at that when you're done making those changes. That way, if you ever bring it back into the software, you're not going to accidentally remove all that work you did. Okay, but you just have to keep in mind that you're no longer going to be able to edit it the same way. And also with this tool though, just want to point out that you can click and drag over an area and it will select all those points, and I can move them all at one time. So that's another really cool thing about this tool. Like I said, this is just a different way of selecting actual stitch points, but like I said, you have to be careful with it. But I needed to make sure I showed you that, and because that tool's there, and it does have a lasso select option for selecting stitches, which is also really cool. So it works just like the regular lasso select tool, and you can select different points, grab them, move them. It's just a handy way of selecting actual stitches in a design. So that's the basic ways. Now, that's not all of the different ways that you can select objects. One of the other things, I'm going to go ahead and turn off stitch points here. I utilize selecting things out of the sequence view quite often. And so things like, I come in here, if I know what I want, I know it's in the sequence, I can just come right in, click on it, and it selects it. And I can even go to zoom to fit, which you learned how to zoom in and out of things in a previous video. But selecting items using the sequence view is very handy at times, especially when you have a lot going on. You can kind of really figure out what you want just by coming in here clicking, so that you don't make a mistake and you're trying to use the selection tool to find what you need. Sometimes it's just better to come over here into the sequence view, and anything that you click on in here will get selected. And you can select multiple pieces by holding down, clicking and selecting one, and then holding shift and selecting additional items, and that will select those as well. I do this quite often, especially if I need to reposition things. I will come into the sequence view, make sure that I get everything that I need by selecting them and maybe holding down shift or control to select different pieces. It's just a different way of selecting items. So while we're in the sequence view and we're talking about selecting items, sometimes it's hard to find what you're looking for. But there are basic stitch types. Like if I come up here in the sequence view and it says show all sequences, if I drop this down, I can have it show just satins, just runs, just steel stitches, just a motif, whatever's kind of in this design. If you created it in the software, if I had applique, I'd be able to do that as well. But if I wanted to just focus on the run stitches, I can come in here to this drop down and select run, and what it let's see, regular run here, what it will do is if I click and expand this out, it's only going to show me the running stitches. It's going to hide all of the other stitch types. So as you see, if I scroll in here, it's only showing run stitches. If I come back here and I choose a satin path, it's only going to show me the satins. And the reason that you might want to do this from time to time is to help you find and select objects. Okay, so it just makes it easier by eliminating you seeing all the running stitches and all that in the sequence view. It's just a way of making it easier to find and select them. So because if I click on the entire color sequence here, it's going to select all of the satin paths, and I can select them all at once and come up and change the density. So that's how you would utilize selecting objects in here, but also making sure that you're viewing what you want. And to get back to everything else, you just do all segments. Same thing can be done with colors. So I can choose this aqua color, and you'll notice that only those pieces are showing up. So this is just another way of being able to find what you need and select it. So if you're only focused on this color, you can just select it from the sequence view, and now it makes it much easier to find what you want. So you could do run stitches in this aqua color, and that's all you're going to see. So just want to show the different ways that you can, I'll bring it back to all colors here, and I'll bring it back to all segments. You'll definitely want to do that. But those are just different ways that you can select items and utilizing the regular selection tools or using the sequence view. So I hope this video helps, and I hope that you will be able to utilize some different techniques when selecting something so it's not so frustrating at times. And again, that's just knowing what you have available and choosing the right method for the task that you're trying to do. So we'll see you in the next video.